So a particular subscriber comment that I was going to read for this week actually got me to thinking about a particular topic for a video, which would tie into something that I was doing last week on my day off. Believe it or not, I'm actually a big fan of Motown, and it would take my older viewers would know what I'm talking about, the baby boomer style generation, or maybe even older than that. But my father was a big fan of it. He had a lot of 45 records. I don't know if the younger viewers or audience members would know what the 45 records were. I see that the 33 RPMs have kind of made a comeback. And the old record players, you had a setting for 33 RPM, 45s, and 78. I actually never saw a 78 record. I think that might have even been something much older. But he was a big fan of the Motown scene back in the early, mid-60s. The Four Tops, the Supremes, before they were Diana Ross and the Supremes, they were just the Supremes in the early 45 records. He had the Temptations and many other groups like that. And if I'm in the right mood and I'm just kind of feeling in the mood for it, I can literally listen to that stuff for hours. Tons of it. Everything from Sam Cooke to the Four Tops, I've already mentioned, to the Supremes, to, any number of bands that came out around that time period. But as a result, I was kind of doing that on my day off from work on YouTube, and I was listening to one of the early groups I was listening to an old video of, and I can't help but like the stuff. I was raised around it. I was hearing that stuff in my household growing up when I was 5 and 6 years old. It doesn't necessarily take me back to being a child when I hear it, but at the same time, there's just a sound to it that to this day, if I'm in the right mood, that I can get into. But I was looking at a particular song by the Ronettes, and I didn't know a lot about Ronnie Spector. I knew about her from the duet she did with Eddie Money back in the 80s. I know my age group would know what I'm talking about, the song Take Me Home Tonight. But I didn't actually know a lot about her relationship with record producer Phil Spector, which by all accounts was an extremely disturbed individual. He was one of the successful record producers of the 1960s during that time period. Anybody and anyone who was in music probably bumped shoulders with him at one point or the other if you wanted radio airplay or anything else. But in fact, he even has a brief scene in Easy Rider. He's the guy buying the cocaine. He's sitting at the airport doing all that coke. He probably wasn't acting when he did that scene, but shortly after they had met, she had married him, and of course he went from being, by her account, according to what I was reading online, he went from being, this wonderful guy in the music industry with loads of money that was promising her a career in music probably, to being a very violent, abusive individual that kept her under lock and key in her own house, refused to allow her to have shoes, believe it or not, because if she had shoes she could walk away, created a coffin in the cellar of his house and told her on numerous occasions he would bury her in that coffin if she ever tried to leave him, and she ended up breaking a window in the early 1970s and crawling out and escaping. Don't know a lot about the murder case that he got involved in many years later. I remember it being on the news back in the 90s, but I couldn't tell you all the details about it. But he died in prison as a result of it, and if half the tales of what she was saying was true, he should have been in prison long before that. He ended up stealing most of her royalties, and she had to sign over custody of her children because he said he would kill her and kill them if she didn't, and et cetera, et cetera. Really horrible situation and a real extreme example of abuse. But as the case is, whenever you wander off into something like I want to do on a day off when I'm just browsing the internet listening to music, it led me away from that particular story into a whole plethora of other stories of abuse survivors. Now, of course, his case, the case I just opened up with, is a very, very, very extreme example of abuse, and I think to this day, unfortunately, there is a persistent attitude that unless you're living in a situation like hers, you're not being abused, which is a horribly backwards way of looking at things from my own perspective. But one thing that I did read about a little bit online was this type of thing. In addition to all the physical and the physical stuff he did to her, he kind of gave her this feeling, this idea somewhere along the way that she was talentless, that she couldn't possibly make it on her own in the music business without him, even though he had already destroyed her musical career. And I got to reading on, And somewhere along the way, I stumbled across these articles, and I couldn't cite them all here, but people who had survived domestic abuse. And in some of the situations, in fact, a lot of the situations, and trust me, I'm leading somewhere with this topic, don't worry. A lot of the times, one of the things that happened in the abusive situations is not so much the physical abuse of being punched, the physical abuse of being, beaten or something horrifying like that, which is bad enough in itself, but it was this emotional side to it, in addition to the already emotional abuse you're getting from the person, the abuser, the verbal barrage of abuse, is this belief that these abuse victims sometimes develop that prevents them from just walking away from the abuser in, you could never make it out there on your own in the world without me. There was one particular lady who was talking about she had degrees in accounting, she knew how to manage money, she was confident she could get a job, but her husband telling her, this entire house and everything is in my name, there's nothing that you own, and you'll never be anything without me. If you walked away from me now, you would be nothing out there. You wouldn't even know how to start without me, and all this other kind of thing. This helpless dependency that abusers often inflict on their victims, in this idea that you cannot possibly survive without their iron grip on you, in part because the abusers themselves are cowardly assholes that know that nobody is going to tolerate that level of punishment and mistreatment and torture underneath them. But so they need to instill that fear to keep people from leaving them in some cases. It's funny, there was a movie back in the early 90s, it was with Robert De Niro, Ellen Barkin, and Leonardo DiCaprio when he was a kid. And I can't remember the title right off the top of my head, it eludes me, but there's a scene at the end of the movie when Ellen Barkin finally gets enough courage to leave her abusive husband, when young Leonardo DiCaprio was telling her, all we got to do is walk out the door. We can walk away right now, we're free. De Niro, brilliant actor, immediately shifts gears. He's no longer the bullying tyrant monster that he's been throughout the whole film. He starts screaming, well, what will you do without me? Well, what about me? What about my needs? What about my wants? What about me? You're going to abandon me. The cowardly face of the abuser is finally revealed. But it got me to thinking about something, because a subscriber talked on him about a certain power trip that a person was on that was a sponsor that was telling their sponsees who they could associate with, who they could not associate with, and the sponsees ended up relapsing. And in that situation itself, they kind of vanished. I'll read the comment at the end of the video, but I'm kind of leading up to a point here about AA in general, and something that kind of crossed my mind when reading that topic and hearing about Ronnie Spector last weekend when I had my day off. Well, my days off are Thursday, Friday usually, but anyway, you get the idea. It was my day off. I was browsing Motown music and surfing on the web. But there was a common thing that got me to thinking about something there, because AA often argues that you can leave anytime you want, that you can walk away anytime you want, that the door is open to walk away anytime you want. And it got me to thinking with some of those articles I was reading, that's what a lot of these abusers would tell their spouses that they were abusing. Well, you can leave anytime you want to, but you won't make it out there without me. What are you going to do for money? I own the bank accounts. I own the car. You'll be nothing without me. You couldn't survive on your own like that. Interestingly enough, as I was reading more about it, in fact, I wasted a couple of hours on, well, I wouldn't call it wasted, but I spent a couple of hours more reading about all this kind of stuff that I hadn't planned on doing when I started out listening to Diana Ross and the Supremes and Ronnie Spector singing Be My Baby Tonight. But even in, I had to make the chair squeak, I had to move. I was trying to hold the position to stop the chair from squeaking, but I failed. Anyway, even in parent-child relationships, believe it or not, I was reading about this, and believe it or not, one of the channels on here, I can't remember if it was Tegan Alexandra or who it was that was talking about this very thing, but parents oftentimes keep their kids in a childlike state, not that they keep them from maturing, but they keep them dependent upon them way into old age, even way on up to the point they're, in their 50s and 60s, and the parents in their 80s and 90s, and they've got that fear instilled in that child. You can't make it out there without me. They emotionally torment and abuse you to the point that the child is literally frightened to stand up to the parent. The parent has become something like a god, kind of like these abusers I just was talking about. They're not just an abusive asshole to the spouse who's afraid to walk away. they have become something more magnified. They become something a lot more powerful. They become God for all practical intents and purposes, that you can't stand up to them. You're conditioned not to stand up to them. And I noticed in the sponsor-sponsee dynamic that I saw in the years in AA, not to mention the program itself, because here lately I've been getting all these comments about, well, Bill W. was smart and spiritual, and he knew what he was doing. The book is perfect. The book is perfect. It's just the people in the program. And of course, they all have excuses. Oh, the people are bad. You got bad people everywhere. You got rapists and child molesters in the library. Failing to notice that if you got a rapist and a child molester in the library, you call the fucking cops. And they hide behind the traditions and say, well, we can't turn these rapists and abusers and child molesters in. Because that would violate the traditions. As a matter of fact, before I get sidetracked, I'm going to get back on the topic. But somebody commented on another social media platform about how someone in a meeting was advised not to talk about a rapist or a child molester because rapists and child molesters get sober too. That sounds very far-fetched, but let me tell you something. I was in a meeting one time and there was a lady. She was a speaker. Wasn't one of my favorite people. She was a guru, of course, but somewhere in the early part of her story, she mentioned that she got too drunk at a high school thing or whatever, and of course later on she minimized it by saying, what was my part in that, which is fucking bullshit. If you get raped, you don't have a fucking part in it, you're a victim. But she said somewhere along the way that she had gotten too drunk at this high school thing, and this guy had his way with her forcefully, and she said no means no, which I agreed with her there. But then, of course, later on, she had to look at her part in it and see that maybe secretly she wanted that and all that, which is fucking horse shit. Rape apology, horse shit. But the point is not that story. The point is, after the meeting was over with, when a bunch of people were outside talking, there were several women, and we're not talking men, we're talking women in the fellowship, that were saying, I don't know if she should have told that story and said that, because there's a lot of men in here, they do all kinds of things when they're drinking. There's a lot of men with their fist steps, when they've had too much to drink, that's just how they are, That could threaten their sobriety. I can tell you that I've been blacked out, pissed drunk many times over my life. And I have woke up on the floor with vomit everywhere and pee everywhere and a complete total wreck in my household. But I've never committed a rape. Never. And I don't have a part in that, and it's not because, like the AA old-timers would say, that I have a secret desire to do it, and I just hate rapists because, I'm just jealous I can't do it. No, never done it. No fucking means no, and she was right to tell that story. She was wrong to say she had a part in it. But yeah, that kind of thing I've heard goes on in AA meetings. So yeah, we must protect the child molesters and the rapists, because I've even heard child abuse victims talking about their part in something. Now, to kind of navigate back to what I opened up with, when you're a victim of abuse, oftentimes it's kind of hard, according to what I was reading, to vocalize what it's like to have somebody in your life, like a husband, like a father, like a mother, whatever it is, that becomes this all-powerful entity that you're too terrified to stand up to, that you literally are unable to stand up to because you have been conditioned in a way by the abuser to not be able to stand your ground with him, to not be able to walk away from him. And that it takes an incredible amount of courage to finally break free and walk away from somebody like this. And you're going to get to a place like AA and you're going to be told, well, you played a role in that. You let it happen. So you're not innocent and all that other kind of shit that they do. But in the sponsor-sponsee dynamic, I often witness people on power trips that were treating people like garbage and treating people like dirt and literally laughing about them when they would relapse and drink, or when they would commit suicide and they would say something like, some of us have to die so that others can live, some of us just can't get the program, and all this other kind of shit. Your big book itself, before anybody jumps in and says, well, that's just the people, not the program, your big book itself is rife with this kind of illogical, contradictory bullshit. And even though I have attacked the big book, and I've attacked Bill W., and I've attacked the founders of AA, and I've attacked the fact that AA never had a success rate, that it never even had an original 100 members, that the very first words in the book, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are 100 men and women, who is a complete fucking fabrication. That none of those people magically stayed sober. I can provide chapter and verse through the Orange Papers, not the fucking shitty Facebook group, but the Orange Papers website. That was the anti-AA group drama that I talked about in another video on here if you find it. But those people didn't stay sober umpteen years. Bill Wilson stole a lot of money from them, etc., etc., etc. But I don't want to get into literature for this particular video. I wanted to talk about the abuse dynamic, and why I think it becomes so impossible for people to leave AA, because literally AA itself takes on this magnified institution of limitless power in members' lives, to the point that you feel like you are accountable to them in some kind of weird, twisted way. It was kind of like, and I'm going to close with this comment in a minute, I haven't finished my thing yet. It's kind of like what somebody did say in another comment to me not too long ago. I wouldn't have got drunk with any of these people. I wouldn't have even hung out with any of these fucking people. Yet I'm dependent on these people to tell me what to do, and I think that's one of the key reasons that people have a hard time walking away from the cult. The cult becomes an entity, an all-powerful authoritarian entity in your life that you don't even really fully realize, that I didn't even fully realize for a very long time, that you literally are conditioned not to stand up to. It never occurred to me back in my really, really early AA days, when I was letting them heap abuse on me and I was feeling like the worst person on earth because I slipped and had a fucking drink, that these people are nobody. They're not a power of anything. They're a bunch of fucking losers with sobriety dates that are using those sobriety dates as a tool to bully and manipulate. Just like the abusive husbands to the abusive wives. These abusive wives, like one lady was saying in one of the articles I read, she said, I grew up in a working class, southern town where, the women in the family could pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make money. I knew I could do what I had done as a teenager and make it on my own. I knew I would be fine. But every night when he would heap that abuse on me and tell me that I was nothing without him, that I couldn't make it without him, that I couldn't balance the checkbook without him, even though I knew he was fucking lying to me, the power that he had taken hold of was too much for me to stand up to. Luckily, that lady did walk away from the piece of shit. But it got me to thinking about the authoritarian atmosphere that AA had. It was this all-knowing entity that literally presided over me in such a way that I felt accountable to it. I don't have to justify my existence, and neither does anybody watching it. You don't have to justify who you are to some shitty fucking sponsor that has zero qualifications to even be running your life to begin with. If you walked up to a random stranger on the street and you knew that this random stranger liked to steal from people, lied to people all the time, was a bully and a piece of shit in general, you wouldn't take anything they said to you with any kind of authority whatsoever. They say, you know what your fucking problem is? Your fucking problem is you can't swallow your pride. You say, fuck you, fuck off. You mean nothing to me. Yet AA does take on that abusive relationship power dynamic, in my opinion, and it's one of the reasons that people don't leave it as quickly as they should have, or as quickly as I should have. I think I see too many people oftentimes beating themselves up for why they didn't leave, and I think that's a key component of it. There is another component I could talk about involving something Foucault called the panopticon. I think I didn't pronounce that correctly at all. I'll have to research for the next video on that. But I do think that's a crucial thing, and I think it was important for me to just say that while it was all on my mind. I didn't have a pre-plan. I didn't have a pre-plan for this video. That's just kind of where I went with it. I was going to say one more thing before I read my subscriber comment of the week. There was one article interview I did read when I was doing that, where a lady was almost murdered by her abuser. She's kind of semi-famous, so I'm not going to reveal the name or anything like that. Not really. Anyway, forget about that. She was talking about this guy literally almost killed her. He literally he shattered all of her teeth. He shattered her cheekbones, jawbones. She had to have all kinds of reconstructive surgeries and everything else. And he was looking for a knife to stab her to death after he had already beaten her like that. And a couple of other things that she said went on in that house. He tortured her for hours. And she had talked about, she had thought she was really going to die at his hands. And he was later on tried and convicted. Hopefully, fortunately, I hope he dies in prison. It would be actually a little bit too good for him to just die in prison. Hope he gets the shit beat out of him in prison. But she said one thing that was important to her in getting over that, because, she has gone on to write books and do other kinds of things and appear in movies or whatever. I'm not going to keep going about her because, believe it or not, I don't really want to reveal her identity about that, because she said it was always uncomfortable to have that brought up to her. But she said one of the key components in getting over that traumatic event, even though she was married to an abuser, and even though it was an abuser who tormented her and made her life hell on earth before he really did try to honestly beat her to death, was that she viewed that abuser, he's in prison now, hopefully, like I said, he never gets out, she had to view him as just a man. And when she said just a man, I didn't want to accept that at first. I said, well, I wouldn't call a piece of shit like that a human being. I mean, wouldn't call him anything. But she said, and this is where it fell into place for me, she said, he's just a man in the sense that he's not this all-powerful monster. He's not this boogeyman. He's not this demonic god from hell, that had so much power over me, that he's literally just a deranged, tormented, screwed up individual that's paying for his crimes in prison. And the more I thought about that, I understood what she was driving at. It wasn't that he's just a man in the term of we must love him because he's just a man with that AA horse shit. She was saying he's not this powerful entity to me today. That's how she was able to kind of transgress the horrifying thing that she went through. But he's just a deranged human being with no power at all. He's not this terrifying boogeyman that he used to be when she was married to him and he was beating her up on a daily basis. And I think that was kind of something that I hadn't thought about in regards to AA itself. AA people had become, even when I began to hate them the way I did, they had become this gigantic entity. These gigantic, monstrous, monolithic creatures that I was just nothing but tiny in front of, that, or whatever you want to use the analogy of, and that they were really just deranged pieces of shit whose opinions would mean butts to me in the real world. But I just thought that was kind of an important thing to talk about this week. I kind of wondered if maybe in the comments you could tell me about your own period in deprogramming, if it was part of your deprogramming process to see these people for what they fucking are, deranged assholes. Anyway, I'm going to close this with a subscriber comment. And they wrote, before I went back out, I texted a few people and I told them I was about to take that first drink. I wouldn't have done that, but this is kind of cool. The responses I got confirmed that I made the right choice by choosing to leave AA when that happened. Well, one of the commenters replied to me, just know that if you do, you'll lose me as a friend until you come back in and pick up a white chip. Yep, with friends like that, I don't need enemies. I can only imagine. They tell you that they're going to love you until you learn to love yourself. They'll tell you that it's unconditional love in the program of Quackaholics Anonymous. They will tell you that they're just there to help a sick and suffering alcoholic, but if you drink, you're condemned. Now, if you're a rapist, a child molester, an abuser, well, your feelings fucking matter, doesn't they? Also, a girl about my age that had the same amount of time in sobriety told me that her sponsor said she could no longer hang out with me because I was using again. Funny thing is, at this time, I was actually sober. The sponsor made her run errands, and I was like, you know something, fuck that. Next thing you know, that sponsor shamed her and then fired her, and she went back out. Not sure what happened to her, but that sponsor totally fucked her head up. The sad part about this story, and I even commented and said that, is not the fact that there are assholes in AA that do that kind of shit to people, that gaslight people, manipulate people, and torment people, and fuck people's lives up. But it's the fact that it didn't surprise me at all to hear a story like that, because I've seen it dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure most of the people who subscribe to this video and are not here to tell me how AA is perfect, it's just people, they probably got a similar tale. Anyway, I did not intend for this to become a 24-minute video, but yeah, I think I've kind of covered all the bases I could cover for this week, and I will see you guys next week.